To the happy couple who always did play in the mud, my sister said, raising her glass just high enough to catch the light and the attention of every single person in that barn-turned-reception hall. Laughter followed, polite, restrained, but unmistakably sharp, like the sound of crystal cracking under pressure. My cheeks flushed. Not because the joke was clever, but because it wasn't the first time she'd said it, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I glanced across the long table at my husband. Nathan's hands were resting in his lap, calloused from the fields he'd worked that very morning. He'd changed into his shirt and tie behind the tractor shed just an hour before the ceremony, still dusty from checking irrigation lines. His nails weren't clean. His eyes were. He leaned toward me, then just enough that I felt his breath near my ear. "Let them laugh," he said, his voice steady, warm. "We know what we have." I smiled, but it was brittle. My father had barely touched his dinner, and when he stood to speak, the murmur of forks against plates faded into a hush that felt practiced. Gerald Barrett never wasted words, not in business, and certainly not when publicly critiquing his children. "My daughter Clara," he began with that performative sigh he reserved for speeches at retirement parties and client funerals, "has always chosen a different path." Danielle, my older sister, raised one eyebrow and sipped her wine. Elise looked down at her napkin. While her sisters pursued their careers in law and finance, he continued. Clara followed her heart. A simpler path. A quieter life. The word simpler landed like a thumb pressing on a bruise. And now she's married Nathan, a man who works with his hands and understands the value of honest work. We wish them happiness in their life together. There was applause, brief, thin. A few claps too slow, as if people were waiting to see how they were supposed to react. I reached for my water. I hadn't touched the champagne and stood up. The metal legs of my chair scraped against the barn floor louder than I expected. Every head turned. "To family," I said, lifting my glass. "And to learning who really has your back when it matters." Danielle's smile faltered just for a beat, then returned brighter, tighter, more practiced. I sat down slowly, heart pounding. Nathan reached under the table and gave my hand one firm squeeze. "That's my girl," he whispered. I didn't know then how much weight those 4 words would carry, how much ground they would anchor when the earth finally shifted beneath all of us. 3 years later, we stood in my sister's marble-tiled foyer, holding a green bean casserole that probably cost less than her doormat. It was the annual Barrett family summer gathering, half barbecue, half political theater, and I could already hear the sound of glasses clinking out back the familiar cadence of Danielle's voice, carrying just a bit farther than everyone else's, like a mayor campaigning in her own backyard. As we stepped out onto the stone patio, my mother spotted us first. "Clara," she called, her voice bright and brittle. "There you are. We were just talking about the vacation home Danny and Evan bought in Charleston." Of course they were. Danielle floated toward us in a sundress wide enough to make me nervous for her red wine. Her smile, as always, was calibrated, generous, but calculated. "Oh, you brought food," she said, eyeing the dish like it had crawled out of the dirt itself. "That's sweet." "From our garden," I said, placing it between the catered pulled pork and a bowl of imported olives that looked like they cost more per ounce than our entire tomato harvest. Evan joined us with a martini in one hand and a smirk in the other. His polo shirt looked like it had been pressed directly onto him by a luxury brand. "Is it organic?" he asked without looking at me. "Or just basic?" The question hung there for a second, and I felt the familiar flush creep up my neck. "It's homegrown," Nathan said, stepping beside me. His shirt was simple cotton. His hands were still marked faintly from pruning. He looked like he'd wandered in from another planet. Evan nodded, swirling his drink. "Still doing the dirt thing." "We're doing well," I said. I kept my voice even as practiced as Danielle's smile. "The farm's been profitable for 2 years." Danielle laughed, a delicate sound, like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Profitable," she repeated as if trying the word on for size. "Oh, honey, that's adorable." Her words didn't sting like they used to, but they still left a mark. I remember thinking, if they find us so embarrassing, why do they keep inviting us back? And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice answered, "Because someone always has to play the role of the cautionary tale." I was standing alone near the edge of the patio, watching the light catch on the edge of Danny's new pool when Elise found me. She had 2 glasses of wine in her hands, and that cautious look she always wore at family gatherings, the look of someone bracing for something no one else had noticed yet. "They're being especially awful today," she said, handing me a glass. I took it gratefully. Today, I raised an eyebrow. "Elise, this is just Tuesday with them." She gave a soft laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's been tense lately. With Evan's work. Danny's been on edge." On edge how I turned slightly, trying to read her face. She hesitated, glancing toward the house, then leaned closer. "I probably shouldn't say anything." That was Elise in a sentence always halfway between honesty and family loyalty, her heart stuck in the middle like a bookmark in a story she never chose. "You're already saying something," I said gently. "Might as well finish." She lowered her voice. "Some of his investments, they didn't go well. Big ones. There's talk about them having to sell the Charleston house. Maybe the boat too." I blinked. That wasn't just tension. That was unraveling. But I didn't say anything. Not yet, because the strangest part wasn't the news. It was Elise's face when she told me, like she'd been holding it in for a long time, waiting for someone else to notice. And I wondered, how long had she known things were falling apart? And how long had she let them treat us like we were the ones barely holding on? It came 2 days later, just before sunset, while Nathan and I were in the greenhouse sorting seed trays for fall planting. The air smelled like damp soil and rosemary, and the world felt for once uncomplicated. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Clara. My mother's voice shaky, but clipped the kind of tone she used when someone had just died or ruined Thanksgiving. "Hi, Mom. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Listen, we're having a family meeting this Saturday at the house. 2 o'clock. It's important." I paused, wiping my hands on my jeans. Family meetings weren't a thing in our house, not when it mattered, not when I'd needed them. "What kind of meeting?" "We'll explain when you get here. Just bring Nathan okay." She hung up before I could ask anything else. I stood there, phone still in hand, staring out at the rows of sun-drenched vegetables, things that made sense, things that grew when you gave them care and time. Nathan looked up from the tray of seedlings. "Who was that, my mother?" I swallowed. "She wants us at the house Saturday. Family meeting." He straightened slowly, brushing soil from his hands. "What do you think they want?" I gave a humorless laugh. "Maybe to finally apologize for calling our life a sideshow." Nathan didn't smile. He walked over and gently took the phone from me. "Whatever they ask," he said, "remember this, you don't owe them anything." And yet, part of me still hoped this was about healing, that after all those years of being the one they barely looked at, I was finally being invited in. But another part, the quieter, sharper one, whispered, or maybe they just need something, and you're the only one left who still has something to give. It rained that morning, a soft gray drizzle that soaked the leaves but never quite touched the ground. Nathan drove us in silence, one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally tightening when the tires hit loose gravel. As we turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, I felt something cold settle between my ribs. The house hadn't changed, same trimmed hedges, same flagstone steps, but it looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown. Nathan parked at the curb engine, ticking softly as he turned it off. "Whatever they ask," he said again, looking at me. "You don't owe them a damn thing." I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't budge. As we climbed the porch steps, my phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "Please come. It's serious. We need you. Danielle." I slipped the phone into my pocket and rang the bell. The door opened too fast, like they'd been standing just behind it. Inside, the furniture was arranged deliberately, chairs angled toward the couch like a courtroom with one empty witness seat waiting. "Clara." "Nathan," my father said, his voice smoother than I expected. "Thank you for coming." We sat. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was loaded. Practiced. Evan stood near the window, arms folded. My mother twisted her wedding ring like she had when I was 8 and came home with a failing grade in math. Danielle sat perched on the edge of a chair, eyes glassy but alert. Elise was off to the side, hands folded in her lap, looking anywhere but at me. "So," I said, finally. "What's this really about?" My mother opened her mouth, closed it. My father stepped in. "The family is facing some financial difficulties." I said nothing. Neither did Nathan. Evan turned around. His face looked worn, the first crack I'd ever seen in his perfect facade. "Cut the act, Clara," he snapped. "You already know. Your sister told you." I looked at Danielle, whose eyes flicked to Elise. I could feel it now, the shape of it. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a pitch, a plea, or worse, a demand. We could lose everything. My mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung there heavy and soft like the moment just before glass hits tile. Everything Nathan asked quietly. The house, the retirement accounts, the Charleston property. My father said the words clipped efficient. Evan made some investment decisions on behalf of the family. I turned to Evan, who was now staring hard at the rug, jaw tight. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but I still don't understand what this has to do with us." Danielle sat forward. "It's the land," she said, and just like that, there it was, the mask slipping. "Your farm. It's the only major asset not tied up." "We need you to sell it," my father said. Blunt, unapologetic. The rain outside had stopped. Inside, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the hollow space where empathy should have been. "You want us to sell our home," I said slowly, "to clean up a mess we didn't make." Evan stepped forward sharp again. "It's about family. About stepping up when it counts." I felt Nathan shift beside me. He stood not abruptly, but with a calm that made the room tilt slightly. "You know," he said, "it's funny how quickly people remember their family when they're drowning." Danielle scoffed. "Oh, come on, Nathan. You farm. You grow vegetables. This isn't life and death." "You're right," Nathan said. Then he crossed the room, opened his leather satchel, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He set it gently on the coffee table right next to the unsigned sale papers they'd prepared. "What's that?" my father asked. Nathan opened the folder, revealing pages that looked more like legal briefs than soil reports. "Patent number 10,847,392, he read. "Advanced precision irrigation system, developed on our land, licensed to 15 farms across the Midwest." He pulled out another, soil optimization software, predictive planting data, currently contracted with 3 regional co-ops. My mother stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "We're not just farming," Nathan said, his voice calm but cutting. "We're testing, innovating. Everything we grow, everything we develop, it's part of a larger system." I watched Evan's expression shift from confusion to something colder. Recognition. "Wait," he said, stepping forward. "What's the company called?" "Verdant Tech," Nathan replied, looking him straight in the eye. "Why familiar?" Evan turned pale, because he knew, because the company he'd bet against the one he'd convinced his investors to short was ours. "That's impossible," he said quietly. You lost their money," Nathan said, still calm, "by betting on our failure." My father opened his mouth, but no words came. "Every dollar you gambled away," Nathan added, "fed right back into the thing you thought was worthless." Danielle looked stunned. My mother looked like she was trying to wake up. I reached out, then slowly closing the folder. "You didn't just come here for help," I said. "You came here asking us to destroy the very thing you spent years mocking, the thing that without knowing it you'd staked your survival on." And I realized they hadn't just misjudged Nathan. They'd never once tried to see who we really were. They hadn't just needed money. They needed the version of us they thought we were, small enough to say yes, quiet enough to comply, blind enough to forgive. But we weren't that family anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin envelope. No contracts, no patents, just photos, snapshots from a life they barely looked at. I laid them gently on the table. There was one from our wedding, me, in my borrowed dress, Nathan with dirt still under his nails. Everyone else blurred behind us, already half turned away. Another from my graduation. I was holding my diploma. My parents were looking at Danielle, and one from a Christmas dinner, the last one I'd come home for. Elise had set the table. I'd made the entire meal. Danielle arrived late, brought store-bought dessert, and somehow still got thanked for everything. I looked up and saw my mother watching the photos like they might rearrange themselves into a better story. These are the moments I said, voice low, even. Not the big ones. Not the ceremonies or the speeches. Just the quiet times where you chose everyone but me. No one spoke. I pointed to the wedding photo. Danielle toasted us by calling me dirty. And you laughed. I pointed to the graduation. Dad mentioned Elise's internship but forgot I'd graduated with honors. I placed the final photo down. That night you all left without saying goodbye. Because Danielle had a spa appointment in the morning. Danielle scoffed, arms crossed. Oh, come on, Clara. You're being dramatic. Nathan's hand brushed mine, but I didn't need it anymore. I was already standing. You didn't just forget me, I said, eyes locked on each of them. You built a version of me that was small, unambitious, simple, because it made you feel bigger. I paused. But I wasn't small. You just refused to look closely. Evan opened his mouth. I held up my hand. Not this time. You don't get to speak now, I said softly. You had years. And in that silence, brittle stunned, I felt it not power exactly. Not victory. Something quieter, something steadier. Like finally hearing your own voice echo back from a place no one else had ever let you speak. Evan stepped forward first, his voice sharp louder than it needed to be. You think this is about old photos and bruised feelings? This is real money, Clara. Real people. You think that farm makes you invincible? I didn't flinch. He was used to people backing down when he raised his voice. I wasn't that person anymore. No, I said calmly, but it makes us free. Danielle shot up from her chair heels, clicking against the hardwood. We're family, she said, as if that word had just occurred to her. You're seriously going to let us fall apart over pride? You didn't care when I was falling apart, I said quietly. You just called it her phase. My mother stood, hands clasped tightly. You're being cruel. That stopped me. I looked at her, this woman who taught me how to set a table just right, how to write a thank you card, how to shrink myself politely. No, Mom, I said, voice barely above a whisper. I'm just not being quiet anymore. Behind them, Elise shifted. Her eyes met mine. Something flickered. Not yet an apology, but maybe the space where one might grow. We needed you, my father said flatly. I nodded once. You still do. I picked up the folder. Nathan took my hand. Then what do we do now? Danielle asked. You leave, I said. And they did. Not one of them slammed the door. Because when people like them lose control, they don't explode, they vanish. It came the next morning. Early. The sun hadn't fully broken through the fog yet, and the kitchen smelled like wet basil and leftover bread. Nathan was out checking the fence line. I sat at the table holding my coffee, staring at nothing. The phone buzzed. Elise. I almost didn't answer. Hey, she said. No greeting, no filler. Just that small voice I remembered from childhood, the one she used when our parents were fighting, and she wanted me to crawl into her blanket fort and just sit with her. I didn't know how bad it had gotten, she said. Until I saw your face yesterday. There was a pause. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Not an excuse. Not a performance. Just a sentence wobbling in its own weight. I didn't expect you to, I said. But thank you. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't say she'd talk to the others. She just said, I see it now. And sometimes when someone finally sees you, really sees you, that's enough. For now. 2 weeks later, they showed up again. But this time, it wasn't my family. It was a small group from the Department of Agriculture. A regional rep, 2 researchers, and a photographer. They came to walk the land, document the soil data, review our system. Verdant Tech had just received its first federal innovation grant. I stood beside Nathan as they took photos near the irrigation control hub, the one he built by hand. Piece by piece in the old shed we once thought would collapse in the first hard winter. We didn't hear the car pull up behind us. But when I turned, I saw Danielle. She didn't step onto the field. She stayed on the gravel drive, her white heels not made for mud. She was wearing sunglasses, but not for the sun. She looked at the camera crews, the clipboard in my hand, the seal on the jackets. Then she looked at me. There was a flicker of recognition, not pride, not shame, just the stunned quiet of someone realizing the story they told about you no longer holds. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just turned back to the field and said loud enough for Nathan to hear, "We need to plant deeper this season. There's more coming."